Welcome to Behind the Mic podcast. This is this is the first of many special segments that we're going to be doing called Hope Revealed, where we occasionally revisit the podcast's previous format by inviting guests to share their stories. Today, I've invited longtime friends, Jason and Melody Lietzau. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Hi.
Hey,
Happy
Mike.
to be here.
We're doing great.
Glad to have you guys on. We spoke a little bit before this, and I'm so incredibly honored to have you guys on our first Hope Revealed segment. And, you know, we met up back in probably 2010, 2012 area.
Yeah.
You guys had just adopted. We'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. And I followed you, of course, on social media. We followed one another for years and have watched your story kind of emerge there. But recently, you guys have shared your story in written form so that I could kind of catch up. I think this is going to be a story. Your testimonies are going to be encouraging. And I'm going to say that up front, because once we start getting into this, it's not going to seem so encouraging to most people. But you guys have made it clear to me in the 15 minutes we've been talking that you have hope. In all of this, you have hope. And so, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I would love to just start off by introducing who you are, and let's get into your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm Jason Melody. We've been married for almost 24 years. Next month will be 24 years of marriage. We have 3 kids. So we have one that is on his way to graduating from Biola University this year in the spring. And then we have our second, Jonah, who is a senior in high school, so he's going to be graduating this year as well. And then we have our daughter, Hannah, who we adopted from China back in 2010, and she's a freshman in high school. And it blows me away how fast time goes to think about her being a little baby when we got her, and now she's heading into high school. So that's our
remember
family.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've been here in Southern California our whole lives. As Melody said, I've lived here in Southern California. She's lived in Southern California, so we've grown up in this little hub here in California.
Well, I'm in Ohio, and it's 40 degrees here.
Oh,
and
man.
I would love to be in Southern California right now, just for the record.
It's an icy 66 here right now. So
That's cold
maybe
for us.
not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was in San Diego, I think it was in like August, for Turning Point USA conference, faith conference, and it was so beautiful just to walk outside at 10 o'clock at night, and it was just comfortable. So
yeah.
We do have some
jealous.
of the best weather, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Let's jump into your story. You actually have at least 3 stories in one here.
Yeah.
And so let's start off with, I guess, would it be your adoption story? You had 2 boys, correct?
We did, yes.
And let's jump into you've got your boys, and so what's going on in the Lietzaus family at that point?
Yeah, so we had our 2 boys. We were loving life with our 2 boys and loving life as a married couple, but we always wanted to add a 3rd child to our family, and we really wanted to add a girl. So we had the 2 boys, and we really wanted to add a girl to our family. And so, probably a couple years after we had our second, we got pregnant with our 3rd, and we were excited. We've been through the process. As you're a parent of a 3rd child, you've been through the process before. So we quickly scheduled that appointment with the OBGYN, and excited to kind of go to that first appointment. We knew that was where you typically hear the heartbeat. So we were looking forward to that appointment. But when we went to that appointment, pretty quickly it went in a much different direction. So the doctor, as he was trying to search for the heartbeat, was really struggling to find the heartbeat. And after a number of tries in a good period of time, I remember this really distinctly. The doctor kind of stopped, and he just looked at us in a very matter-of-fact way and just said, you've had a miscarriage. And it was kind of this surreal, kind of just gut punch to us. It kind of ended the appointment. we were shocked. We were not expecting that news. And so I remember we walked out. As you walk out to the car, you're walking past all of the pregnant women that are in the hospital, which just kind of fortifies that grief and loss that I know a lot of people have gone through. So we experienced that miscarriage. For whatever reason, I remember it was a Thursday. We went home, so we spent the whole weekend as just kind of just grieving together as we just thought about this loss. And I remember we woke up on Sunday morning, and there was kind of this realization for us of like, oh man, are we going to go to church? We've told people that we're pregnant, and now we're going to have to share all this news with them. We just weren't ready to share. And I remember we kind of looked at each other, and the Lord, for whatever reason in that moment, just kind of impressed upon me that in these moments is when we need to be with the body of Christ. It's really when we need to be with our church family. And so we pulled ourselves out of bed that morning. It was hard. We're not looking forward to it. And we made our way to church. We don't normally sit in the back, but I remember we just said, we're just going to sit in the back today. And unbeknownst to us, our church was launching an adoption ministry on that Sunday. And so the passage, I don't know, I'm sure you may have had this experience where you hear a sermon and immediately you just feel like that sermon is speaking to you, or you hear a phrase in that sermon that just grabs you. And so I remember distinctly that sermon, as they preached on adoption, they actually preached out of Romans 12, 1 through 2, where it says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And there was a phrase in that sermon that really kind of just really grabbed me. And our pastor had just shared that God doesn't always call us to comfortable things. Because
we use that phrase sometimes, and not against each other, but when the other one is feeling insecure or having an uncomfortable time, we've kind of used that back and forth to encourage one another.
Yeah. And so that phrase really just kind of grabbed me, and I in that moment I went from grieving this loss, which we were still grieving, to this overwhelming sense that we were to move forward and adopt. It's not something that my wife and I had ever talked about. We loved the idea of adoption, so we loved that. But it just wasn't a part of our plan. We had never talked about it in a way that we were thinking about adding children to our family through adoption. So as we were heading home, I had no idea how my wife was going to feel. So I remember we got home, was kind of thinking, this is rolling in my head, how am I going to bring this up? And as we're sitting there, my wife turns to me and says, "So are you ready to go get our daughter?" And it kind of shocked me a little bit, because we just hadn't been a conversation. And I think I surprised her back, because I immediately said, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's go get our daughter. I'm ready to move forward." And so, from that conversation to the time that we submitted our initial application to Miraculous to adopt, was 1 week. So we made one of the, I think at that point, it had to have been one of the largest decisions that we had made as a married couple, and we made that decision in a matter of a week.
Which was definitely in the hand of the Lord, because Jason's not typically a risk taker. He's very analytical. We have spreadsheets going on. He evaluates pros and cons. And I'm more of the emotional, impulsive person. So this was really out of character, and really the hand of the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And God spoke to you both, even though you look at things so differently. He was speaking to you both in a way that you needed to hear that day, because you both knew.
Yes.
Yeah. God met us in different ways through our different personalities, but God still met us. And even thinking about that in marriage, and just the gratefulness that God unified us, in that time, we were just so thankful that God brought us to it in a different way, but unified in that decision pretty quickly to move forward. So, and once we had decided to move forward with adoption, China had always been on our heart. So we had some friends that had worked in China. That was just a country that was on our heart. So it just made sense that the Lord would kind of lead us in that direction. But once we had decided to move forward, we submit our application, and we find out pretty quickly at that time, this is a number of years ago, that it was over 5 years to adopt a healthy child. Mm-hmm. And so, that was kind of a check. And so I think my wife had talked to our adoption agency, and they had said, well, if you consider a child with a minor special need, then that time frame gets sped up quite a bit. And so I think we had talked about it a little bit, and she kind of convinced me to say, well, I've heard of kids being adopted with minor heart conditions, and sometimes they just kind of heal themselves up when they get here. They're really minor, and so I said, yeah, let's go ahead and let's move forward, and we'll do a special needs adoption. So
well, they had this list of all kinds of different special needs, and I remember just reading over this list, weeping, thinking, how do you decide what you're willing to accept? And my heart kept getting drawn back to heart conditions. I had a pacemaker at that time, so I had a little bit of knowledge about the heart. And, I'd been reading blogs and people that had adopted and kind of researching and had come across lots of minor things like children having holes in the heart that end up repairing themselves on their own. And so, I began to talk to you about that, and you said, okay, if you feel comfortable and you feel like that's where that's leading, then I'm good with that.
Yeah. So then what ended up happening, and what she stopped short of sharing, is what ended up happening. She gets the paperwork that she was sharing, and it had all of the different special needs that you could possibly consider. And so I go off to work for the day. She gets the paperwork, and it just has a box under heart condition that says minor and major heart condition. And so before I get home, she check-marked both minor and major heart condition, and then quickly sent it off to our adoption agency.
And this is where
Jason will be okay with this.
Yes. I kind of held my breath, said a prayer, and remembered the phrase from that sermon, God doesn't always call us to comfortable things. And that's kind of when I sent back to him to help him move forward and just trust in the Lord within this. And really, we look back and we think, this was only in the hand of the Lord. Like, I think we naively check mark the box, not even knowing what that meant for our life, but really felt like this is what the Lord was asking us to do. Yeah.
And so it's amazing to think back, because I often have reflected on this. 6 months before that, if the Lord had come to us and said, would you be willing to adopt a special needs child from China with a severe heart condition, I don't know that I would have been, and I don't think I would have said yes. I think that would have been hard at that point. But here, through a pregnancy and the loss of a pregnancy, and then ultimately God moves us slowly in this process, in spite of ourselves, moves us in this process to say, yeah, we're willing to consider adoption, then we're willing to consider a child with a minor condition, and now all of a sudden moves us to this place where we're now faithfully moving forward in faith to consider a child that might have a pretty significant life-threatening heart condition.
Yeah.
So you're in China. What are you thinking? Did you have second thoughts about this?
Yeah. Well, so I'll back up. So we met our daughter, and I remember that experience. We met her, we got her, we get back to the hotel, and that's when it hits me. So we get our daughter, and she's blue. Her fingernails are blue. Her tongue is blue. Her lips are blue. Her nose is blue. She's having a hard time breathing. I think she weighed 12 pounds, 10 or 12 pounds at 18 months old. And when everything went quiet, and the three of us were left in our room, that's when I went, oh my goodness, Lord, what what did we do? I started to realize the enormity of the situation. Never a moment did I think, oh Lord, I can't do this. I don't want to move forward with this. It was just, it was the final realization where we said, wow, how did we get from pregnant with our third, and now we're here in China and we're adopting this beautiful girl with this heart condition. But the Lord, it was pretty amazing the way the Lord met us while we were in China. So he even provided a missionary, some nurses that were there in China that actually met with us and kind of helped talk us through and looked over Hannah. So the Lord met us in some pretty amazing ways, even when we were still in China before we even made it home.
Yeah, and even before then, when we had her file, we're unclear. You don't get a lot of information. We knew that she had a severe heart condition, but we didn't know what all that entailed. And we had a connection with a pediatric cardiologist who happened to be Chinese and spoke Mandarin, who actually would go to China frequently to help do surgeries. And he was pretty frank with us and said, I don't know if she'll make it home from China. And we said, well, she needs a mom and dad, and somebody needs to add a cane for her. And he played a significant role in walking us through our whole time in China. When we got home from China, we needed to go straight to the hospital. He was there preparing to see her. So the Lord's hand was definitely on this story every step of the way. And I'll let you continue the story of when we brought her home.
Yeah. Yeah, so we checked her in the hospital right away, and pretty immediately they were doing the tests, and so she was there for a couple of days. At this point, we're pretty jet lagged. We're pretty tired. We hadn't been home. My wife was the one in those first couple of days that had spent the night in the hospital, so she hadn't even really spent a night in her bed for, it was probably 3 weeks. And so I remember I kind of one night I said, it's time for you to go home. I'm gonna take the duty. I'm gonna spend the night with our daughter tonight. You need to go sleep in your own bed. And that night I remember our nurse walked in, and we were just kind of chatting kind of late in the night, and she just kind of looked over at our daughter, and our daughter, her oxygen levels, and the reason that her skin was blue was because her oxygen levels were fluctuating in the 50% range. I mean, you and I, normally we should be in the high 90s, 100%, and she was fluctuating in the 50% range. And the nurse had looked over, and at one point, my daughter's oxygen levels had dropped into the 20s, and she was starting to become less responsive. And I saw a little bit of concern on the nurse's face, and I remember the nurse called the doctor in. The doctor looked very concerned. And I'm not even sure what happened. Within seconds, all of a sudden, our room filled up with with all these nurses and medical staff, and they began to work on my daughter. Remember, they kind of pushed me aside and said, you can stand over here, and I just remember kind of standing at the edge of the room, just watching this scene. And so for 2 hours, they worked on Hannah. I remember, I don't know if you've ever seen medical staff in an urgent situation like that, but it's a pretty amazing thing to watch their skill and training in work as they were working to save my daughter's life. One of the nurses, it was amazing. Her, like my wife said, her sole job was to simply walk around next to the doctor and to capture the medication doses that the doctor was giving, and she had to be able to recite it on a moment's notice, because they were giving her so much medication. They had to track everything that they were giving her, and they couldn't put it into the computer. They just had to track it on a clipboard. So at that point, that had been going on for about 2 hours, and once that scene, that kind of chaos had kind of settled down, I just, all of a sudden, the realization of like, I better call my wife. I tell her what's going on. And so I stepped out and I called Melody and I said, you need to get here right away. It doesn't look good. And so my wife arrived pretty soon after that. And when she walked in the room, the first thing the doctor told us was, it doesn't look like she's going to make it. You need to prepare yourself that she's probably not going to survive. She can stay like she is in this condition for about probably for the next few hours, but likely she's not going to survive.
He just kept saying it over and over again. I just remember thinking, okay, I can't stop. It was very heartbreaking to see her eyes shut and just hooked up to everything and so many people and voices in there. At one point I just said, I need everybody out except for Dr. Chang, that amazing doctor that I told you about that helped us along the way. And they explained to us that they could try and go into surgery, but that she had about a 30% chance of survival. And if they did operate, she would most likely come out with a lot of brain damage and not be able to lead a normal life. Or we had the option to just keep her comfortable, and she would most likely pass overnight. So I just told him, I said, you need to go in there, you know how far we've come. You need to go in there and do everything you can to save this little girl's life. And he said, okay, and everybody kind of hustled and bustled out in there, and within a matter of seconds, they were wheeling her away for surgery.
Yeah, when she left, I mean, I know a lot of people have probably a lot more faith than I do in a moment like that. I at that moment, I was pretty certain that was the last time I was going to see my daughter. I really didn't walk out of that room thinking like, oh, she's gonna make it through. I was in a low point, just thinking, Lord, you brought us through this whole process of losing our first through miscarriage, and now leading us to adopt and go all the way to China, to come all the way home, to now see our daughter likely not to survive. I just remember pleading with the Lord, like, Lord, what are you doing? But I do remember very clearly, if you've ever wheeled a child back into surgery, you remember that moment as they wheel them back. And I remember thinking that's the last time we're going to see our daughter. And we went out to the waiting room, and that was a long 5 hours. I think it was about 5 hours that we waited. And finally, the doctors kind of emerged. We kind of look across the waiting room. It's a big waiting room, and you see these two doctors coming. It's kind of like out of a movie or a TV show where they just kind of have these stone cold faces as they're kind of walking across. You're trying to read them. And the doctors come up, and as soon as they get to us, the doctor says, we just don't know what happened. We can't explain it. He said, it's like her pulmonary arteries grew overnight. It's not what we saw in the tests. And she's doing amazing. The surgery was incredibly successful. All of her blue skin and blue nails are now this beautiful, normal pink color. Her oxygen levels are close to normal. And they were amazed. It was an incredible testimony for us to be able to say, well, no, we know why her pulmonary arteries grew overnight. Yeah. So just to see God heal in such a clear way was just such an amazing testimony of God. But we also look forward in her life. I mean, God healed her in that moment, but she still lives with a significant heart condition. We know that as she gets older, unless the Lord intervenes in some way again, she's looking at some more significant surgeries and treatments, and possibly even potentially a transplant, maybe at some point in her life. And so we know that's still, we're still out there. But God has been gracious to her. She's thriving. It's hard to if you saw her, you wouldn't really know that she had a heart condition. So it's just amazing to see the way the Lord has brought her through.
I remember in the hospital, they told us to prepare for a 2-week visit, and that they would still need to do some cognitive testing. And we were discharged in 5 days, and there was no need for any cognitive testing. And in fact, out of our 3 kids, she's our straight A student and thriving. And you would never even know that she had gone such a significant amount of time with the lack of oxygen. Yeah. It's pretty incredible.
God answers prayer. And you guys saw that firsthand over and over again through that ordeal.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Wow. That's Hannah's story. And God continues to tell her story through her.
Yes, absolutely.
And but we're not done. The next on my list here is Melody's story.
Yeah, that's just like we'll just check box it here.
Yeah.
It was pretty soon after that situation had happened. We had brought our daughter back, and we had gone through that with Hannah. I remember my wife would just begin to call me periodically every once in a while, and she would just tell me that she had fallen. She'd been out shopping or she'd been somewhere, and she goes, "I don't know what happened. I'm clumsy, and I just fell." And those calls became more frequent as time went by, and at the same time, she had also kind of experienced some weight loss. And so just some kind of symptoms we didn't really know what was going on. We actually went to some doctors. Initially, a lot of those doctors had kind of just dismissed some of it and said that she needed to eat more, or she just wasn't getting enough calories, and so that's why she was losing weight. But it didn't really seem to fit with what was going on. But I remember it was actually one of my doctor's appointments. I think I was just going to the doctor for some reason, just a general physical, and for whatever reason Melody went with me. And as we were walking into the room, my doctor just looks at Melody and says, "Hey, if you'd be willing, would you just walk down this hallway for me?" So I think he just noticed her weight and how thin she was. He said, "Would you just walk down this hallway for me?"
Well, I encourage you to join us again next week to hear the continuation of Jason and Melody's story, and also their son, Noah. Come back, join us, and listen to this encouraging story of hope.